Hello, here's what's coming up on The World Today. Bolivia becomes the first Latin American country to sever diplomatic relations with Israel over its war with Hamas. Plus, ex-CEO Elon Musk warns artificial intelligence could eventually lead to the extinction of humanity. Moving to the war in Ukraine, a train transporting fuel caught fire in the Russian-controlled city of Donetsk on Tuesday night after intense shelling. Local authorities blame Ukraine, and according to local media, one person was killed as a result of the shelling across the city. Several others were injured, including 3 reporters. That's coming from local media, without specifying whether any of the casualties occurred at the scene of the train fire. Meanwhile, Russian officials declared an air raid alert in the Crimean port city of Sevastopol in anticipation of further attacks from Ukraine. Sirens went off in the city early on Wednesday as traffic on the Crimean bridge linking the peninsula to Russia, as well as sea transport, were suspended. The alert comes amid a string of Ukrainian attacks in recent weeks in and around Crimea, which was seized and annexed by Moscow in 2014. Kyiv's forces have struck a Russian airbase on the peninsula and the Black Sea Fleet command post in Sevastopol as Ukraine seeks to weaken Russia's control over the water. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine's attacks on Russian Navy in the Black Sea has crippled Moscow's war efforts as he tried to rally his troops to keep fighting and not burn out in a world that expects instant successes. During his nightly video address, the Ukrainian president called on the modern world to be set up in such a way that it becomes accustomed to success too quickly. Zelensky said the colossal things done by the Ukrainian forces are now taken for granted. There has been little movement along the 600-mile front line in recent months. A Ukrainian counteroffensive launched in June has achieved only limited success, despite capturing several villages in the east and south. Zelensky has previously rejected criticism, mainly from Western sources, that the counteroffensive was proceeding too slowly, saying the war was not akin to a Hollywood movie set. And while applauding Ukrainian offensive moves that had restricted the operations of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, he said no one should expect rapid success stories in repelling Russia's 20-month-old invasion. Looking at the Ukraine war that is gradually closing in on the 2-year mark, the United Nations says at the latest count, more than 9,900 civilians have been killed since the start of the invasion. UN Security Council members receiving a briefing on the situation in Ukraine from the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The findings were published in a report based on 2 fact-finding missions by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, where it interviewed 35 people, including local residents, witnesses, 2 survivors, medical staff, and morgue employees.
On Ukraine's
is rightly concentrated on the grave events in the Middle East. It is important that we do not lose focus on other crises, particularly not one as brutal and far-reaching as that precipitated by the war in Ukraine. At the latest count, more than 9,900 civilians have been killed since the start of the invasion. To put this into perspective, this is equivalent to almost 16 civilians killed every day. As these are only the figures of that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has so far formally verified, the actual toll is certainly higher.
Russia demonstrates no intention to get rid of its terrorist practices against millions of Ukrainian civilians, which makes it imperative to obtain additional air defense systems to safeguard these critical facilities during the winter. You remember Russian ambassador cynically justifying the mass murder of 59 peaceful civilians. It's probably the reason why he ran away, including an 8-year-old child in the village of Roza, Kharkiv region, on October the 5th. by the supposed presence of neo-Nazi accomplices there. This is also clearly reflected in the report published today by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It's a very short report of 8 pages, and I encourage all of you to read this UN report. Let me quote their conclusions. The Office of the High Commissioner has confirmed the identity of all victims and found no indication that any of the people attending the funeral reception at the cafe in the village were members of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Russia's attacks on Ukraine's ports and grain infrastructure destroyed over 280,000 tons of grain in a month, enough to feed well over 1 million people for a year. We repeat our call on Russia to comply fully with its obligations under international humanitarian law, to act in line with their statements in other contexts in recent days, and allow humanitarians to operate safely and to stop using food as a weapon of war. Russia must end its illegal invasion of Ukraine. This is the only way to protect global food markets and end the suffering of the Ukrainian people.
Ukraine is today the most heavily mined country in the world. Around 30% of its territory requires survey and clearance.
Well, away from the war in Ukraine, tech executive Elon Musk today attended the UK's inaugural AI Safety Summit. Prior to this meeting, Mr. Musk had warned that artificial intelligence, AI, if programmed by people in the environmental movement, may lead to the extinction of humanity. Appearing on comedian Joe Rogan's podcast Tuesday, he said some people would use the tech to protect the planet by ending human life. The summit is the brainchild of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who wants to carve out a role for Britain as an intermediary between the economic blocs of the United States, China, and the European Union. The 100-strong guest list includes world leaders, tech executives like Musk, the ChatGPT bot Sam Altman, and academics for the event at the Bletchley Park, home to Britain's World War II code-breakers, on Wednesday and Thursday. King Charles released a royal message just a while ago hailing the potential of emergency artificial intelligence technology, but urged urgency in addressing the risks presented by it.
We are witnessing one of the greatest technological leaps in the history of human endeavor. The rapid rise of powerful artificial intelligence is considered by many of the greatest thinkers of our age to be no less significant, no less important than the discovery of electricity, the splitting of the atom, the creation of the World Wide Web, or even the harnessing of fire. AI holds the potential to completely transform life as we know it, to help us better treat and perhaps even cure conditions like cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's, to hasten our journey towards net zero and realize a new era of potentially limitless, clean, green energy, even just to help us make our everyday lives a bit easier. However, if we are to realize the untold benefits of AI, then we must work together on combating its significant risks too. AI continues to advance with ever greater speed towards models that some predict could surpass human abilities, even human understanding. There is a clear imperative to ensure that this rapidly evolving technology remains safe and secure. And because AI does not respect international boundaries, this mission demands international coordination and collaboration.
England's King Charles Channels Television's London correspondent, Teniola Oyetayo, joins us now. Teniola, so good to see you. The King has hailed the emergence of AI as one of the greatest technological leaps in the history of human endeavour. But then he talks about the importance of harnessing this development for human good. What are you hearing from different groups in the UK which fear how this technology could impact their work and how it affects the jobs sector?
Hi, Millicent. It's good to see you too. I mean, that fear is nothing new. I mean, even for us, in a few years, we could fear that robots could be reading the news. But, you know, people have always perhaps and will always voice concerns about where to draw the line with artificial intelligence. While some people welcome AI as helping ease workload, the fact is that some other jobs could potentially be at risk, or people in those sectors could be paid, you know, lower wages. But I don't think this is the focus of the summit today. Leaders have always tried to reinforce the idea that artificial intelligence will and should be used to work alongside humans and not disrupt the way we work. But there is that fear, and, you know, people are cautious. And I think that's one of the most important reasons for this summit. The possibility of AI are immense, and many things we don't know just yet. Our fears could be, you know, we might need to be scared of things more than just AI taking jobs. We already have issues of AI deep fakes, election disruption and national security threats. So as AI advances, this summit is looking at all possible threats, and not just immediate ones, but also the threat of systems evading human control and taking over like we see in sci-fi movies. And today we've had an agreement signed by 28 countries identifying that there is an urgent need to understand the threats that AI poses and, you know, collectively manage those risks.
And we are seeing that it was a 100 strong guest list, talking about the role the UK wants to play with the US, the European Union also. But one wonders where Africa comes in all of this. But then, did the Prime Minister give any assurances that AI would improve employability or availability of jobs?
Well, we've not heard the Prime Minister speak at the event yet, but he has always tried to give assurances that AI would work as a sort of co-pilot in people's day-to-day activities, as well as he does admit that it will change the labor market, but he says AI will change the labor market in a positive way. Taking advantage of technology has always been a key focus for him since taking office last year. So I think that's why this summit is really important to him, because as we use AI more, there's more need to regulate against, you know, these potential dangers. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. But the Prime Minister has a busy day ahead of him. He's meeting the US Vice President, Kamala Harris, who's also in attendance. And then tomorrow, after the second day and final day of the summit, he's expected to host a live interview with Elon Musk, which should be quite interesting, Millicent.
The view of ex-CEO Elon Musk seems to, I mean, what he said, you know, the human move to extinction, and this is if the AI programmed by people and the environment movement. Is he alone in this thinking?
I mean, there's always people who think this. Just ask people on the streets. I'm sure even in Lagos, people have their theories about this. But, you know, other attendees at the summit have said this is a threat. The way he made the statement is a bit overblown, and they've sort of warned against speculating and instead focus on the potential, what they call potential present day threats, such as national security threats, election disruption, and those kind of things that, you know, the threats that we can identify now, not really looking at the future and if, you know, AI can take over. But Elon Musk's statement isn't very surprising. So, you know, people aren't dwelling too much on it because he's been very outspoken about the dangers of AI and has warned several times that it could lead to what he calls the destruction of civilization. So, yeah, no surprise. And people who believe what he says will run with it. So.
And finally, before I let you go, Teniola, is there any African presence in this discussion? Because, you know, talking AI is talking about the future.
Yes, there is actually a huge African presence. I do believe we've got some delegation from Rwanda. We've had some guest speakers from other African countries, including Nigeria, actually. So there is a huge African presence. I mean, something like this wouldn't be happening without an African presence. So, yeah.
All right, Tenyola Oyetayo, our London correspondent. Thanks again.
Thanks, Millicent.
And we continue in Africa, day 2 of King Charles's visit to Kenya. But last night, a banquet was held where Kenyan President William Ruto praised the king for his courage and readiness, which signals progress to rewriting the atrocities of colonial past. During the state banquet hosted by President Ruto, King Charles acknowledged the wrongs and abuses of the past, saying he deeply regrets the atrocities suffered by Kenyans during the struggle for independence from British colonial rule. King Charles and Queen Camilla, who are on a 4-day visit there, have commemorated World War fighters and veterans and are also expected to tour conservation work in a wildlife park and travel to the port city of Mombasa.
This is a highly encouraging first step under your leadership to deliver progress beyond tentative and equivocal half measures of past years. We are therefore confident that under your visionary leadership, the Kenya-United Kingdom relations will continue to prosper for the benefit of our two countries and peoples. And if colonialism was brutal and atrocious to African people, colonial reaction to African struggles for sovereignty and self-rule was monstrous in its cruelty. It culminated in the emergency, which intensified the worst excesses of colonial impunity and the indiscriminate victimization of Africans.
The wrongdoings of the past are a cause of the greatest sorrow and the deepest regret. There were abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence committed against Kenyans as they waged, as you said at the United Nations, a painful struggle for independence and sovereignty. And for that, there can be no excuse. In coming back to Kenya, it matters greatly to me that I should deepen my own understanding of these wrongs, and that I meet some of those whose lives and communities were so grievously affected. None of this can change the past, but by addressing our history with honesty and openness, we can perhaps demonstrate the strength of our friendship today. And in so doing, we can, I hope, continue to build an ever closer bond for the years ahead.
Well, it's a countdown to Christmas. We are only a few weeks away and everyone is excited. But I think people in Brazil, especially children, would be more excited to know there could be enough Santas to meet them wherever they are. That's because 50 Santas just graduated from Santa School in Rio de Janeiro, sporting a white beard on a ho-ho-ho tram and some with their name engraved on their belts. The Brazilian Santas caroled on the tram journey through the Santa Teresa neighborhood, waving at passers-by. On their way back to the school, the jolly men received their graduation diploma that qualifies them to work as official Santas. They were also given the golden key that symbolizes the beginning of the Christmas season. During the graduation ceremony, Father Christmas remembered the Gaza Strip conflict and demanded peace in the world. Ho, ho, ho. That's our show this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Bye for now.